So before I start, I love doing this because I love seeing all of your images. And there were some really, really great images this round for sure. And you do all need to know that I have received some training and I am an approved judge and all of that. But you really have to keep reminding yourself that judging is subjective. Every judge brings their life experiences and a lot of other stuff to judging. And so you have to know that these are real subjective, and I'm very opinionated. So, but having said that, when people look at art, it evokes something different in everybody. And I may see stories in your images that you didn't intend for someone, that wasn't what you were trying to say. So just know that you are so intimately familiar with your art that you and your audience may not get the same things. I may get more out of your art than you do. So anyway, I just wanted to preface it. That you just always have to have thick skin, and judging is subjective, even though it's based on real criteria. So for tonight, I was asked to base my comments and my scoring on technical excellence, impact, and composition. And those really are the big three. And everything else feeds into those. So that's the way that I looked at these images. So you want to start at level 1, correct?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, and do you want me to do commentary? Do you want to say what my scores were? How do you want me to?
No, I think we'd definitely like the commentary, but
Okay.
if you could throw in the score, that'd be great also.
Okay. All right, so let's start at the beginning, and here we go. All right. I loved that you put titles on your images this time. I can't remember if you always do that, but I just think the title is a great way to introduce your concept, your image, and to add both impact and storytelling to the image. So
Hey,
I did
Chris,
appreciate.
Chris, let me interrupt just real quickly. So this is the level 2 images.
Oh, these are? Oh,
yeah.
Wait a minute. Oh, you're right. Let's see.
Yeah, go to the album.
Okay, am I on track now? There. Is that better?
Yep. Is that good enough for you guys?
Okay, I guess that's as good as we get. Yeah, so I did appreciate having some titles and some storytelling to introduce your images to me. So for this one, I think that one of the things I really enjoyed, and it's probably the first thing I enjoyed about this image, was the color palette, the real subtle tones of the pink in the sky, giving me some sense of the time of day. I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed the detail that was in the rocks. I think that ways that the light could, that the image could be strengthened were maybe some cropping, probably off the bottom, just to take the horizon out of the center of the image. You'll hear me make that comment a lot tonight. Taking the horizon out of the center of the image, meaning if you crop some of the bottom, then it'll move the horizon down in the image. Or if the foreground is more interesting than the sky, then maybe cropping sky and bringing it up. But generally the impact will be higher if we move that horizon either up or down closer to the rule of thirds line. And I think this image could benefit from that. I also felt like the lighting on the rocks was just a little bit, I don't know the word I want to use, under processed. I think that we could have brought out just a little bit more detail I love the detail in the water. I liked the shutter speed for the water, and there's great interest in the sky. So this image, again, the color just really grabs you right in the beginning. And the leading lines in this sort of central composition, I'm often not a fan of putting sort of the subject right dead center. But in this one, the leading lines, which are not really symmetrical, but they're similar in shape, I think that this gives this image some punch that that it may not have had from another angle. So, and I appreciate that the sun is not in the center, so it kind of balances the bright spot in the middle of the sun on the side, the dark trees on the left. So I thought the composition on this worked fairly well. Again, the horizon's in the middle. So personally, I think that the streak across the upper right-hand side of the sky, personally, I think we could have cropped below that. That doesn't really add anything to our story, and it kind of takes my eye away because it is the brightest part of the sky itself. And so you might want to crop down, and in this case, the foreground is really interesting. So I might want to move the horizon up higher in the image by cropping some of the top out of the image itself. And because the grasses are so flat lit, I may want to go in and just brighten those up just a little bit, especially along the edges of the leading line of the canals, and more so on the left, because that's where the sun is coming and should be hitting it maybe just a little more. And I think that that would balance out the whole image. But this is a really lovely image. Altogether. It's handled really well for the lighting that it was shot in. I really enjoyed this image, and I think part of it is the way it caught my eye. So the top of the image is more or less black and white, but that green at the bottom really caught my eye. And because of the shape of the grasses, and then the what do I want to call it, the sort of the desaturating progression from bottom to top forced my eye to look at this image from bottom to top. And we normally read images left to right, but this one grabbed me and caused me to move through this image very differently. And I really did appreciate that creativity from the maker of this image. So the color really played a big part, and the detail played a big part, and the difference in textures moving from one part of the image to the next. And I really loved that the maker included enough depth in here so that we could really see the fog and haze in the background, because that explained why the trees began to look a little bit faded and out of, not necessarily out of focus, but more faded than I would have expected from the foreground. So I thought that was another great creative choice. The only real recommendation I have for this image is in the bottom right corner. There's a bright patch of water that has some texture below the green part. And that's a really bright spot that we don't really need the eye to be drawn to. So I would have cropped this image to eliminate that strip of brightness in the bottom right, so that it didn't disrupt the flow of my view of the image from top to bottom. But I thought this was really just a lovely capture. And I meant to say that one of the strengths of this image, I thought, was the technical nature of dealing with these kinds of light, mixed light in a single image, with a somewhat uninteresting sky, but managed to make all of that work together. So I think the real strength in this image is the initial impact. And I think the initial impact comes right here. For me, this is the whole image right here. The contrast of the fall color and the blue mountains in the background. Normally, we do like to say that framing is an element, a nice element of composition, but in this case, I'm not sure that this tree, which lacks detail all up here, really frames this well enough to have continued to include it in the image. And I didn't go in and crop these and take another look, but this kind of vertical framing on the sides, for me, kind of pulled me to the sides of the image. And I really wanted to stay right here. On the technical side, I think there are a couple of things. You really need to either clean your sensor or treat all this sensor dust that's occurring in your image. You can see all these places of sensor dust. And for me, in a competition, to have that kind of technical thing that you could have taken care of really pulls me back on my score for this. And again, the horizon ends up being the top of the mountains. And I don't know that all this sky adds much interest to the image. And so you could crop out a little bit of this sky, especially this bright area right here, so your eye doesn't get pulled up there. And I think that that would strengthen the image a little bit, but oh, it's such a pretty scene. So for this one, I think it has initial impact, especially this building on the left. The lines in it, you know, coming across and the lines going back are really beautiful. And given the kind of lighting that this was shot in, there's still a great amount of detail, and there is a sense of light and dark in here. These have retreated and they're not as much in focus as this building on this side. And so one of the challenges of this image for me is that it becomes cut right down the middle. And because the road is going to the middle, see this bright red stop sign? Honest to goodness, red draws the human eye almost as much as anything else. And so I kept landing on that stop sign. And it split the image into two parts for me. So I think that the maker has two really interesting images here because there are two subjects on either side of the image. And what I really wanted was I wanted to really stay in this beautiful landscape that's in the midground and background. So I felt like the image was just bisected by this road, and it became two images, and it made it hard for me to travel back and forth in the image where I think I was intended, the maker might have intended me to be. But I think that the capture of the architecture here was done really well. Again, I love seeing these scenes because, of course, you know, I'm in North Carolina and I don't get to see them very often. So as a viewer, you know, this is really exciting to see something different. The challenge, I think, of this image is that it's showing a slice of life in that, you know, the irrigation is kind of quiet in the winter, and there's, you know, it's just a quiet, covered with snow kind of slice of life amidst this just amazing background that, you know, that the viewer, the maker gets to look at every day. And so in here, the main focus of interest, point of interest, is what's happening to the community in the snow with this backdrop. So I don't really need to see all this foreground down here, and I don't really need to see this cloud up here. You know, it's like this sky, this whole thing is really interesting to me. And so I would recommend to the maker to make more of a pano crop out of this, even than it is already. And it's always a challenge to balance the color of the snow against the color of the mountains. Sometimes the snow isn't really this purple, but on the other hand, we're getting some purple late day in the clouds. And so as a viewer, I can accept that, but always be careful of that when you're processing snow. This scene has a real great sense of place. And it certainly is a great sunset to have captured. I think that the use of compositional elements here was a strength of the image, using this as a leading line, having these two repetitive elements. I think once again, you're going to hear me say the horizon is really in the middle, and I don't know how much of this sky we need. I wouldn't know till I cropped it. The color is a big part of the image, so I wouldn't totally get rid of the oranges and purples. But again, trying to balance the top and the bottom of an image like this is really difficult. But I think it's a great use of color. I think it's a nice use of compositional elements. And but I do think that the foreground is just a tad underexposed. I think we could have given that a tiny bit more punch, and it would have still balanced with the top of the image. So this image has really an amazing amount of detail in the trees and the rocks, the texture of the water. I appreciated the point of view, the angle that it was taken with, so that the end of these rocks did not intersect the horizon itself. You know, you either want them above or below. You don't want them, you know, making mush out of the horizon. So I appreciated that. I did feel like the horizon on this was kind of crooked. If you look at the surface of the water, I think we're going downhill here. This we might attribute to the shape of the shoreline, but this water out here, I believe is, if you put a ruler on it, is kind of going downhill, and we need to tilt back up to see that. The foreground water is a bit overexposed. It may not be overexposed, but it's contrasty. So the blacks are really, really, really black, and the whites are really, really, really white. And I think that this image with slightly less contrast would be just a little softer. And the more I looked at this image, the impact was great. The more I looked at this image, the more confused I became, because I suddenly realized I didn't know where the water's coming from. And so now I have a feeling that maybe, was this a wave that washed in and it's draining? Or there don't seem to be waves out here, so I don't think it's overwash. And I got really caught up with, where am I and where am I standing, and are there big waves behind me? So I think that the composition of this and the perspective created enough tension that I stayed in it, and I was like, ooh, what's going on here? So I really enjoyed that about this image a lot. I thought the perspective on this was really, really interesting. Looking down, certainly a fabulous use of leading lines of the cliffs, of the mountains going down, funneling your view right out into the center of the islands, right in the center of the image. And this is one time that I will say that I was very accepting of a horizon in the center, because it was a very small horizon line, but the whole image funneled me right into that one spot. So I felt like that was really well done. I did wonder about the crop. So when we choose a lens that has a lot of distortion, the way that we're distorting the clouds up here, I started wondering about if we needed to be looking at that and having my attention drawn up there. And I started thinking that a crop that maybe ran right across here and even cut off the top of that tree, because there's enough information right in here to tell me that tree's pretty tall. If that would keep my focus even more into the center of the landscape. And then I wondered, well, if I did that, do I need to balance it with a little crop on the bottom? And if I did that, it wouldn't hurt the image either. So I think playing with the crop on this could even strengthen it further. But really did appreciate the detail and the perspective and the use of these leading lines. So on this image, I think there are many layers of interest. We've got, we've got the crossing in the foreground, and then we have this nice swath of green and the mountains and the sky. And there's not so much sky that we feel like, oh, too much negative space. And then the choice of of where we photographed this from. At least it gave us not a central horizon, but a feel of, the trees swooping down into the background. So we got a sense of the water, the river moving back into the background. So I liked that in the composition. I wondered if, because the title of this I think it was Reflection, and there may have been more of the title, Reflection of something. So the reflections became really important. And I wondered if the maker had the opportunity to step to the right a little bit so that, are these elk or moose? I'm not sure myself. We don't have these where I live. They look like moose to me, but then their reflections would be in total. We would, if we moved here, then maybe we would get the whole reflection of the moose in the water here. So just thinking about when you're titling, make sure what story you're telling here. But I thought the flow of this image was pretty nice. I felt the mountains were a little bit overexposed, but this kind of light this time of day is really difficult anyway. Let's see. Oh, the other comment I wanted to make is maybe the maker had no place else to go. They could have been standing on a rock. Then you would work on the timing because they look like they're crossing this way. So taking the image just a second or two earlier would get that reflection there, if that's the story you're intending to tell. So again, in this one, again, really nice use of the slope of the mountain, the leading lines. Actually not making this the subject, but letting it be a leading line into the image itself. In a lot of landscape images, I sometimes find I don't have any place to land, like, oh, I need to stop and look at something, but what am I going to look at? And I really felt like everything was pointing me right over to the edge. And I found myself just kind of peering over the edge, like what's down there and how far down is it? So I felt like this was a really adequate place to land in this image. I love the detail, and I think the colors were captured really nicely. And if the maker's listening, the one thing I would like to ask is if the maker would try flipping this image horizontally. And we have that, we have this discussion with images, and we recognize that this is the way the landscape looked. I couldn't take it from the other side. But when you're entering an image into a photo competition, the judge doesn't know most of the time. It hasn't stood in this spot. And so I don't feel like this has to be authentic, photojournalistic to the spot itself. So as a photograph, as an image presented to me to look at and enjoy, I'm wondering if the maker would flip the image, because that would allow this leading line and this leading line to let me read across the image like this, and then this spot would be over here and I'd land in it. So I would take some time looking at all of this coming down before I landed here. In this image, I'm coming into the image anyway, and I land here really early, and I don't really have as much chance to look at everything else in the image. So I just wonder if the maker would flip it and look at it as if it were an image presented to somebody who didn't know this scene. Certainly we don't do that if there's, writing or words or things that are really obvious, or if it is an undisputable, iconic scene, and to people who, if this is near where you live and everyone is going to know exactly what this looked like, then in that case, maybe you wouldn't want to flip it. But as a viewer, I wondered that. So here, I think the first thing that we all see is the color, and the complementary colors, the orange versus the blue, the warm versus the cool. And we all get that. And so that gives this some initial impact. And I think that impact fades. I don't think this has lasting impact, because boy, this image for me is really about this roiling, sunset or sunrise sky. I mean, this is a crazy sky, and I just want to spend a lot of time in it. This is a pretty scene, but compared to that sky, it begins to pale. So I think the impact kind of fades after a while. And I almost feel like this is two images. It's one of the sky and then one of the land, especially where this leading line takes me down, so that I see the community down here and the interesting silhouettes. A couple of technical things with this image are you got to get rid of your sensor dust, and you'll hear me say that a lot. That's one of my pet peeves. So when I see sensor dust, I'm like, you can do this at the maker, you can get rid of that. You don't need to draw my eye over there. And the other thing is, as we're processing our images, especially images that have intersections of very bright areas and dark areas, we have to be really careful about the edge glow that our processing can cause on the edges of it's usually mountains where this happens. So be very careful that your processing doesn't do that, because that area of high contrast your eye is drawn to, and then you see, well, why is that glowing right there, and why does this have a glow all along there? And I get stuck there and I stop enjoying the part of the image you want me to see. Let's see. For this image, what I really appreciated the most was the capture of the sky itself. I really loved being able to see what I perceive as precipitation coming down, or the bottoms of these clouds falling out. This image for me had some technical challenges in that none of the rock area, none of the foreground and middle ground seemed to be sharp. It all seemed to have a softness that didn't match the sharpness in the sky. And again, it may be processing, because again, we have this edge glow coming down in these areas of high contrast all the way across where the contrast is bright. So always be careful of that, because especially for judges, that will draw an eye. And one other thing I would ask you to also look at is these color shifts in the clouds. We often get this in gray clouds, where we have this whole swath of magenta here, and then of magenta up here, and then cyan coming through here, and then cyan and magenta. And sometimes it's a function of the way the sun is, but for this image, it seems to be a processing issue. And if it's not, I apologize. If that's the way the clouds really look, then that's really cool, and I want to come see that, because sometimes the clouds do have these rainbowy effects in it, but seems to me not quite enough light is hitting these clouds to cause that. So always be careful that you're not introducing that as an artifact when you're processing your images. I really felt the color palette in this image was so interesting. It was nearly like a black and monochrome with selective color. So it's really fascinating the way the city is lit in this image. It's also kind of confusing because there is no reflection of that color in the water. But as an image to look at, it was an interesting swath of color going through the middle, and there is some in the sky, so it's believable, and some in the clouds, that this is the way it was really lit. Couple of notes are, the horizon seems to be going uphill, so straightening that, the buildings all seem to be leaning to the left, so bringing that horizon down and straightening it out, I think, would strengthen the image. I think that a lot of this water here becomes negative space that you don't need to tell your story. And when you're finishing your images, take a good look around the edges. Always look around the edges of your image and see if there's anything distracting, intersecting, like the top of this mast, this bird, you don't want distractions that take the eye to a place where you really don't want your viewer to go. So just pay attention to those kinds of details. But I just felt like the color and the capture of the sky in this image were done really well. Great sky. And what I really enjoyed about this image was the way the maker presented the sky in this image with so little ground supporting it told me that that was the story, you know, that stormy sky is the story that they were trying to tell. The landmass at the bottom, the ground does really anchor the storm itself, but giving that storm so much soaring space was, I think, a very creative choice on the side of the maker. And again, be really careful about these magenta to cyan shifts in your clouds. Now, as far as composing an image like this, I'm gonna repeat my comment about the edges. So always look at the edges, and this kind of draws my eye because I'm like, oh, that must be a road, or was that a path or a fence? And there's this interesting little thing here, and we really don't need it to tell this story. So I think your crop could start maybe here. It doesn't take anything away from the storm, and yet it allows the edge of the image to be relatively uninteresting to the eye itself. And a lot of heavy contrast on the bottom. So always try to get some detail in your shadows. The way it is presenting here, I'm missing some detail in the shadows. And on a dark, dark day like this, that's very difficult, but just see what you can do about stuff like that. But it's really a fabulous capture of the textures and what's really going on in the sky. All right. So one nice thing about this image is it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, or a foreground, middle ground, background in the image. There were a few confusing things that made it gave me the feeling of sky replacement, even though you didn't replace skies in this competition, when the trees, the edges of the trees here, you can see these technical details here where the trees are turning blue, as if you changed the color of the sky and you selected it and you didn't quite get your selection right. You know, those kinds of things draw the eye, like it almost looks like a duplicate tree here. Always be careful of that, the intersection of the sky and your landscape itself. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention is I really think that this central part of the image is overexposed. I think maybe we would have captured a little more detail. It's a really tough time of day to take images for a competition. This kind of lighting is so difficult. It's very harsh, and we get harsh shadows, and it's difficult to control, you know, the light and dark in the image. So always be careful of that as well. But I did appreciate the sense of the story going from front to back in this image. Oh. I think this is really creative timing. You know, I mean, the maker may have known this may have been a serendipitous capture, or the maker may have done this intentionally, but the maker did look at the scene, and having the moon in a place where it just fits perfectly in the sky here. It's just a bit higher than, you know, the rule of thirds, although it's on this third line. I think it's placed in a great position. I think the darkness on the bottom is handled well. We have a, oops, let me close my email. You know, we have a nice range of colors in this. I think the color palette was really appreciated. Please censor dust, censor dust, censor dust. Always really check closely for that. And this image could have explored a tad more of noise reduction in the sky, probably a higher ISO image. Certainly the time of day is a challenge for taking this image, but I think that the color palette and the moving from front to back and having the moon in the image was a nice creative choice. So here's a similar landscape, similar setting. I think there's a nice, really nice flow in this piece of landscape. We have flow here and here and here and here, which I really appreciated. I wish the maker had just waited, if this is moonrise, just a tiny bit, or if it's moon set, just a bit earlier, so the moon isn't intersecting just the edge of the tree. It would have been great if it was just down a little bit or it was up a little bit, but it makes this compete, and these two are really competing subjects, and I don't really know where to land on this, but they chose a wonderful landscape setting to put the moon into. I think that the thing I appreciated most about this was the abstractness and yet knowing what it was. All the patterns and the textures. I think the light in this was handled nicely. You know, we still have some shape to the trees. You know, we see light on this side, dark on that side of the trunk. I do think the processing has made it just a bit crunchy. I know we use the word crunchy to mean it could be over sharpened, it could be over processed, it could be intentional. Maybe it was an artifact, but it's a little too crunchy just for my personal tastes when I'm looking at this, but well seen. I mean, I think this was really well seen.
Are we allowed to comment?
I don't know, David's in charge.
Yeah, go right ahead.
This is gorgeous. I think it's fantastic.
Okay. I think the strength of this image is its sense of place, its sense of, you know, foreground and background. You know, it's unfortunate that sometimes we get skies with no clouds, and that's a challenge, and you know, let the blue sky bleed through the trees. But let's see, what did I want to say about this? Yeah, so I felt like there was almost a lack of a center of interest. This red tree in the beginning, in the foreground here, is where I want to land, right in here. So I think the use of color to direct the eye was really useful. And I don't know that we even need this side of the image, because this gives me a place to land, and compositionally that would be, you know, kind of on a rule of thirds. But I think the detail in this was captured really nicely. We see the bark, we see all the leaves, we get the texture of the grass, we get a sense of depth, because we, you know, we see the rise in the background with a little less detail. So I think this is, again, challenging time of day, but well seen. I think the title of this was Forest Glow or something similar. And this certainly is glowing. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's just an amazing scene to come upon in the fall. I liked the composition of this. The glow actually provided this sort of spiraling view right into this rock, which gives me a nice place to land, catch my breath, and then look around the rest of the image. So I think the composition on this really worked, and there was enough detail that I got a great sense of place in this. I even think you could take some of the glow in this part of the image down, but overall, an abstract capture of something that we can relate to in the fall. Again, this is a nice capture of layers from front to back, and that may be the strength of the image and the capture of detail. So there's a lot of detail in here. For me, there's not a great landing place, not a great center of interest. You know, I kind of feel like, what should I look at? There's so many things to look at. And then I kind of get caught here looking at the shape of these trees. And I wonder, you know, if the lens choice was the right lens choice for this landscape, maybe straightening those out so that I didn't feel like the whole image is caving in toward the center. Again, a really hard time of day to really make great landscape photos. This kind of bright light of the day with no clouds in the sky. I mean, it's a great challenge. So I think that the color flow through here really does help this image a lot. Where the details here and the colors changing, so we have a bright spot and a bright spot and a bright spot. So the eye kind of flows through this, and it kind of ignores the cloudless sky and the lack of a landing place in the upper part of the image. I personally think this image is really about the bottom half here. I think it was titled something to do with the willows, if I recall. And so I assume these are the willows, and that's what the image is about. So I think maybe a pano crop a little bit. I mean, I would encourage the maker to try that and see if this flow even becomes stronger. But I did appreciate the flow in the foreground. So I think this is really nice composition. I like the flow of this curve coming around here, leading us right there. Setting it, looking at it high enough so it breaks the horizon enough that it doesn't just get stuck in the horizon. I like the horizon is in the lower part of the image because the cloud detail really does add something to the story and to this image. And I like the detail in the grounds themselves. The only wonder or thought two thoughts I had about this image was, I wondered if we made a crop on this side of the image, we'd still have this flow here. I don't know if it would be too close if we cropped it right about here. Oops. And it would effectively put this subject on a kind of a third rule of third line, and we wouldn't be drawn to look at this. This leading line points us right there, and the barn points us right there. And I don't want anything to distract me from all of the textures and the tones. The tone range in this is really nice. And the second, the second suggestion or comment I have is about this horse that's laying on the ground. Because it's white, my eye gets drawn there, and I don't know if it's sleeping or it's dead, or I don't know what this is. I might consider taking that out, or at least toning it down, so that when I look at this image and I see this and I come to this group of horses, then I come right back down here and I keep circling through the image rather than get drawn over there. It's a minor thing, but I did notice it, and I thought I would just throw it out there. Another, really great use of these lines, these repetitive lines, leading us, especially this one that leads us right into the center here. I don't think that all of the crushed rock or stone, whatever this is at the bottom, gravel, I don't think this adds to the story. And I think because there's a central horizon in this image, maybe removing this would give us the grittiness of the mountains and the softness of what might be a dry lake bed, or I don't exactly know what this is, but I'm assuming it's a dry lake bed. And then when we go back to this crunchiness, it kind of draws me back down there. So I think that the juxtaposition of the texture of this mountain and the texture of these flats might even be more spectacular if we didn't have the crunchy bottom on this. But I think the color palette in this is really nice, and the reflections bringing the blue down into the bottom of this again is really nice. This image really captivated me. I think that impact was there. I mean, boy, you come into this image, I think it was titled Parched, and regardless of there being a bit of water there, look at this land in such great detail. Look at the depth of the parchedness, and I get caught up in that. And then all of these lines lead me to this fabulous formation here. Enough sky to tell the story of kind of what the day was like. And I think that the lighting, based on a lot of cloud cover, but not totals, where we have some light on the mountain, and then some flatness here, I think it just tells the story of the day itself. And then the color palette is really fabulous between, you know, these reds and browns against it's sort of these blues, bluish green and green vegetation. So I felt the flow of this image was really wonderful. And instead of a horizon cutting it in half, making this one story and this another, I think that the creativity of capturing the terrain to create flow, where this is almost mirrored, the shape of this, really served this image really well. I thought this was just really well done on all accounts. So for this image, I felt it had good initial impact, and that was because of the sky. I mean, totally drawn to this fabulous sky and the capture of it. Technically, I think we had a few challenges. I don't know what this is, but maybe it's a thumb that got in the way, or it's a flare. I'm not sure what this is, but feels like it doesn't need to be there. And the reason I notice it is because of the depth of the sky, the depth of the color of the sky. So that just distracted me a little bit out of the image. And then we've lost any detail in the blacks here. And then this is almost in the center. So I love the alignment of the car and the center of the sky, the way the sky is going. I could have used just a little less on this side so that I was really drawn into the composition here. And I also felt like not only did we have whatever this is here, but we had a lot of light fall off that I couldn't explain. Whoops. Sorry. We had a lot of light fall off right on from here over on this image that I felt we didn't have on this side of the image. And I didn't quite understand where that lighting came from. So I think this had a few technical challenges, but great capture of the sky and interesting details out in the middle of here. So what a great vista. I mean, what a great vista. I haven't hiked here and would love to. A couple of details about the story that it's telling. That the title said something about them admiring this fabulous vista. The dogs distracted me because I kept, oh, is that a dog? And oh yeah, look, it's behind the rock. I wonder what they're seeing out here. And I got totally involved in the dogs in the story, which many people would never even notice, but I did. And but I wanted to be right there in the middle, and I appreciated the beginning, the middle, and the end, you know, the foreground, middle ground, background of this image quite a lot, where, you know, the vista is mostly this. I mean, look at those fall colors and the shape of the terrain and the softness and all of that. So I really loved the story. I would suggest when you're putting an image like this into a competition, that maybe the red scarf and whatever this red piece is here, you could tone down, because my eye kept going to that. The path led me right to it. And I didn't want to get stuck on them. I wanted to be appreciating the vista. So so I found just a few distracting elements in this that made me work too hard to keep into this story itself. Also felt like this was just a little bit overexposed, I think, or maybe under contrasted. This could have used just a little more contrast or a little less exposure, I think, and we would have had even more detail here and a little bit more detail in the background itself. All right. This is a wonderful sky again. I was a little concerned about the color balance in the foreground. This green cast. At sunset, we might expect this to be bluish. So I couldn't really understand unless this landscape is green, and that may just be you know, something that I don't have in my life experience, is seeing this landscape, this kind of landscape, if it is green. So that confused me a little bit. I also want to make a comment about expanding your sky. Over here in this corner, it looks like what we call clone tracking, like this looks repeated here and it looks repeated here. And then this little piece here and this here and this here seem to be repeats of each other. So if you're taking something out of a sky that was a distracting element, maybe, I don't know, maybe there was a big bird there that you didn't want, or you were trying to make your canvas bigger than taller to give these clouds more room, whatever the reason is, make sure that you draw pieces from different places in the sky so that you don't get this sense of what we call clone tracking, because those repetitive elements, they draw our eye when we're taking a really good look at an image. So you don't want anything like that taking the eye away from a beautiful scene like this. And because of the leading line of the road, for me, it almost cut this image into two images, especially this, because this is a beautiful progression from low to high. And then this element here is pointing me back this way. So I could easily have circled in this side of the image without really noticing this side, because the tones were so much more muted. So always be careful of that when you're doing a panorama, or you're cropping in a panoramic way, to make sure that there is continuity and flow across the whole panorama. This might be our last one. Again, I'm so appreciative of the sweeping leading lines that you have to deal with in your landscapes. They're really wonderful. Again, and even this in the foreground and this in the background really helps give this image a sense of depth and a sense of place. Again, working with a gray sky, you know, you really have a challenge not to have your image seem very, very flat, because it is flat lit, and trying to add just a little bit of contrast to the image, and making this a little darker in the background than it is in the foreground would help. And it's very difficult when your subjects camouflage right into, I mean, you almost lose this one, when they camouflage right into your image itself. So I think this is a really, really nice sense of place capture, a moment in time, but photographically it can be very, very challenging. Let's see, what else about this? I think that was it. I think to give it a little bit more emphasis here, you could take a little off the bottom and a little off the top to make it even more panoramic, forcing the eye to stay in this part of the image. So if the maker listens to that, you may want to try that. I don't know without trying it if that would make my eyes stay here a little bit more, but I'm thinking it might. And I just noticed that the titles are all right here. So I didn't have to guess and remember what the titles were. And then that's the last one in this section. So David, do you want to go back to you, or do you want me to go on to level
No,
2, or do you want to take questions and comments?
If we do have any quick questions, feel free right now, but then we can move right on to level 2. But if there's any questions, speak up. I guess not. Let's move on to level 2.
Well,
Okay.
I just wanted to make one comment. I know that level 1 is the, I don't know if it's the less refined photographers or whatever, but these are some really great images, and everybody that's submitted should be really proud of this work. It's terrific. It's terrific.
I did not take these to be beginner images at all. I just understood that I think level 1 is less experience with the club or something, but I agree with you. There are some fabulous images in here. And as I said in the beginning, it's just a joy to look at these because this is a different part of the country than where I live. And so even though we see a lot of photography from the Tetons, I love seeing your perspective and your take on it and the stories you've chosen to tell.
Chris, this is Ann Ruddle. I live here in Jackson, and I'm more drawn to wildlife photography. So my question has to do with wildlife photography. And there's not a lot of wildlife photography represented. So when you as a person looking at landscape photos, look at this group of images, do you no, I'm going to flip the question. So I'm going to say that when I see the image of the moose walking in front across what we all call Schwabacher's Landing with the Tetons behind, my breath is taken away, because as a wildlife photographer, I would love to have been there for the light and the moment and everything. Did you, as a person looking at these for landscape photography, was your breath taken away?
By some of them.
Okay,
Absolutely.
perfect. Okay, that's all I want to know.
Oh, absolutely.
Good. Okay.
You have such great skies and you have such great horizons. It doesn't look like this where I live. And so I love visiting places like this. But I see these places with different eyes than you see it because you live there.
Which is the great part about your being part of this evening, thank you very much.
And so my comments about flipping images, I mean, I can see here that this is an iconic view. This might be an iconic view somewhere that I haven't experienced. And so if for some reason I suggest, flipping an image, like if you're at Yosemite and you flipped tunnel view so that, Half Dome was in the wrong place, I mean, you wouldn't do that. And if you have an iconic landscape that I just have no experience with, and I say, oh, maybe flipping this image, I'm talking about general composition,
Right.
not because you would never, ever flip an image horizontally that's of an iconic thing.
Unless, of course, you wanted to mess with people.
Well, you can. And unless when you're entering it into a competition, you don't know what experiences your judges are going to have. And if you flip
Right.
Yosemite or you flip the Tetons, and I've never seen it and I've never been there, would I know? And does it make it any lesser of a photograph? So you just have to make those choices yourself. It's harder when it's an iconic landmark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
And the other thing is, I also know that you can view these from either side of the range. And so it may look flipped in one image and it may look differently in another. And so I don't actually know, you know, maybe the perspective all around this range, you know, and maybe flipping it doesn't really mess with my head because I know this can be photographed from many perspectives. It's always maker's choice. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a quick question. The picture that has the buildings, that's my photo. This is Becky. And that's of Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel in Yellowstone National Park. I threw that in because I wanted to know if that really could be considered a landscape. Can buildings be considered a landscape, as it were?
Well, that is really up to your group. There are some nature and landscape photography groups that say no hand of man at all in the image. There are other groups that in their rules specifically allow hand of man in the image itself. And so because I wasn't given that instruction, I assumed that your rules are your landscapes are allowed to have hand of man in them.
Yeah, I don't think we had any of that specified. I was just curious if it, you know.
Yeah, so when I judge something, sometimes they will say, you know, especially more nature photography than landscape photography will specify that.
Yeah, I would
I
imagine.
always assume if it isn't specified, it's allowed.
Okay, well, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's go to let's go here. Yeah, okay. I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay. So the beginning here, really nice placement of the boat in the reflection of the light. You know, that just really is wonderful about this image. And the color palette is, you know, this kind of monochromish, you know, sunset color. I think it works really well for what this image is. This I just was wishing there was a little more space here. This felt really crowded, and I don't know whether this is real or an artifact of the processing, but there is this broad white halo around this whole rock, and I just can't imagine that there's Mr. Fog coming off that whole rock so uniformly. So that kind of distracted me a little bit. But I really enjoyed the detail in the sky, and I enjoyed the detail in the water. Yeah, I just think there are some really nice creative choices made for this image. So for this, you know, either whether this was planned or serendipity, the timing of this is just really great to have the sun in that position balancing the lighthouse is really awesome. I'm guessing this was, well, I'm not even going to guess because I shouldn't make assumptions, but I was going to say this was probably at a lower tide to get further out on the rocks, to get this perspective on that lighthouse, having just visited it last week. So I think this is just a really nice capture. You were just blessed with this great sunset. Did a nice job not overexposing the sun while keeping most of the detail. You could bring a little detail back in here in the rocks here, just bring back a touch so we don't, totally lose all texture in that part of the image. Composition's nice. We've got a horizon in the lower side, and we've got this near rule of third. So really lovely composition, great color palette, and I appreciate the detail that goes all the way through. The color palette of this is really wonderful. Timing, being somewhere where the timing of the changing of the colors in a mixed forest like this is just really awesome. Especially where you have the ghost trees in front that just, give you some sense of the environment itself. I also think it was, whether planned or serendipitous, the capture of this snag was really nice because it's brighter than everything else. It's of a different shape. There's more contrast, light and dark around it. So this really serves as a landing place for the eye, and it's in a nice compositional space. This is one image that I might question whether all of the tarn grasses are really part of the story or not, because this is one image where this symmetrical reflection with the horizon in the middle would be a different image, and I would then stay right in the whole top of this image. Here I'm kind of competing. Like I love these grasses. I love photographing them. I love looking at them. But for this image, I feel like we've got two images here, and crop may not work for this image, but I'd like to see it. But I think this is a wonderful capture of just this moment in time in this place. Nice composition with that element there. I think this is really creative. I mean, this is just a really creative view of this tree. I mean, everything leads us right to that tree. The space around it, the leading lines to it, this one and this one here. I just think this was a really creative. I wouldn't have seen that myself, to see that tree and make it the subject with all of this other stuff going on. The maker was able to make this the center of interest of the image. So I think that was really interesting. I think the exposure on this is difficult because of the bright sky and because of the deep, deep shadows here. We're losing all the detail in the trunks of the trees. I would love to see this with a tiny bit less contrast. And I also wondered what would happen if we cropped it here, or even made this a square crop, so this was really in the center. Do we lose anything from this story? And maybe we lose a few distractions of that bright sky, and maybe we focus on this even more because it's in a larger part of the image. But I felt like those were some technical things that could be addressed with this image, but I certainly applaud the creative eye on this one. This is just pleasant. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. The colors of the flowers against the green of the grass, with the whitish, lightish border above them, with a different texture going into yet another texture, going into yet another texture. So many layers in this, and it has such a sense of place. I think the colors just really catch my eye here. I also wonder if we need this much sky. I mean, we might need just enough so that we don't cut off this peak, which is, I'm sure, iconic and part of many other images I've seen today. But even taking some of this sky, because these are big areas of negative space that don't add, so maybe cropping it a little bit would do the trick for that. And to be honest, Yeah, I had to do that. Taking out things like this, whether it's a bird in the distance or not, or something on your camera. When you've got that black dot in this big negative space, it really does capture the eye on this. Someone asked earlier if I look at these landscapes and do they take my breath away? This took my breath away. This is one of them when I saw this. The color palette in this is crazy. I mean, it is crazy. It goes from hot to cool in a just a fabulous progression. I think that the snow on the foreground part really accentuates that it is the foreground, and it really does separate it from the next valley to the next peak. And I think that that was really striking to set this off, and it gives it almost a three-dimensional depth to this image. If I had any real critique on this image, it's the people. Although I don't mind having people in the images at all, this red jacket and these red pants, again, they just draw my eye, and I don't really want to be looking at them. I really want to stay in all of these fabulous textures and the dusting here, the sense of being dusted with snow. And so just, you know, just pay attention to that. It doesn't fit the color palette. It kind of introduces some tension into what is an otherwise serene image. So always be conscious, especially of reds in your images, whether they're adding or they're taking away from the story that you're trying to present. But yeah, this was really spectacular. I really enjoyed the composition of this, and I enjoyed the contrasting textures, especially between the rack and the rock. I felt like I wanted a little more space down here so that I didn't feel like his feet were being chopped off at the bottom here under the snow. But I really did like the contrast, and I think that the snow on that may be ice and not rocks, or a combination. The snow on this just has a magical texture, and it balances with the animal itself really nicely. There are two subjects here. I loved having a primary subject, but having such an interesting secondary subject to balance in this image. I think that the capture of this cloud fog formation is really spectacular against the mountains. The change in textures here is really, really nice. I think that this gives this image a lot of impact. If I had a critique about this image, I do feel like it's just a bit too contrasty, where here we have no detail at all in the dark areas of the image, and I'd want to see that. And the whites here, I know you're looking at bright sun on white snow, but again, toning this down just a tad. But it's a nice capture with lots of tonal range. I like the panoramic nature of it, and I like the detail in the sky as well. So lots of layers to this image to enjoy. So here, I really enjoyed the exposure. I felt like we had enough brightness for the sun, and we had just enough exposure to see what was going on in the image itself. I did feel like we had several technical challenges to this image. Again, sensor dust, sensor dust, sensor dust, sensor dust, sensor dust. Pay attention to that, especially, you know, in white snow. You've got it here and here. Not so much in the sky, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, but make sure you're taking care of that. And that you're not, yeah, listen to this. Easy for me to say that you're not changing lenses out there when it's breezy. Yeah. How many times have I done that? But we do get sensor dust when that happens. So be very, very careful about that because it really does distract from your image itself. I would love to have seen just a tad more space over here. Not a ton, just a tad, but sometimes we can't move 2 steps to our right. I felt like the processing left this with a couple of challenges. Again, we've got all of this halation right around the prominent trees, the darkest trees, all of these halos around them that distract my eye. And then the snow here, even though this is probably some frost along with snow and ice, it's really starting to look over sharpened and a little bit crunchy. So always be careful of whatever causes that look, be aware of it, and try, not to present images where things get so crunchy that it looks like it's processing and not the actual way the scene was. This is another image that I might explore flipping, because then this leading line in here comes from this side and we go around the curve and it takes us back, and then the tree is in this side of the image. So we work our way from all of this right into the subject of the image. If we flip the image, I would encourage the maker just to try it and see. I never know until I see it whether that's the right thing to do or not. So, but it does come to mind looking at the image. This is really a nice black and white conversion. I was appreciating all of the tonal range of this image. And I think because of the sky, turning it to black and white was probably a really good creative choice, because there is so much negative space here. And we're not being distracted by, oh, it's an empty sky. Again, sensor dust, sensor dust. I think there was more over here, sensor dust. Be really mindful of it. You're going to be so tired of me saying that, but when a trained juror is looking at an image like this, we see the whole image. And so don't give us things that distract us from, these really interesting subjects. And your viewers will be surprisingly eagle-eyed about things like this, looking at this. I also really enjoyed the detail. I think that these Joshua's sticking up in the horizon are fabulous. I just think that this section of the image is just captivating for me. And I love that there was still detail in these shadows that the trees casting on the horizon, on the ground. Me, when I'm taking an image, I want to recommend to you to get higher or get lower, but get that horizon out of the middle. This is not quite in the middle, so that's a good attempt. Maybe getting a tad bit lower. I don't know. I don't know where you were or where you can stand, but again, trying not to leave this kind of negative space is always kind of tantalizing. But nice black and white conversion and great detail. This is so dramatic. I loved the drama in this image, the iconic arch and the sunburst and the way it was captured. So technically wonderful, this burst. Really great job using your aperture on that. And luckily, having these clouds that mimic this right here, really, really nice capture. Again, sensor dust, big sensor. This is probably on your lens, not on your sensor. But pay attention to those things and fix them. But there's nice detail here. I almost felt like because the sun was so strong in the background that maybe this should be more in shadow and not quite as flat lit as it is, but color palette's gorgeous. The composition just sweeps me away, and technically, I really love the way the sunburst was done. The most striking thing about this image was the color palette and the gradation going from the dark purples all the way through to the pale yellows. That was so interesting to me. But more than almost half of your image is out of focus. So we have this really out of focus foreground and this really out of focus arch framing it. And that's a big part of your image, to have that kind of a distraction. So I didn't really know how I felt about it. Kind of wanting it to be cropped quite a bit, so that most of the image was in focus, but lovely detail in the rocks itself. I mean, look at this right here and here, nice shapes. So I think that that was all done really well in this image. Oh, well, there was something I wanted to point out. Let's see, what was it? Oh, no, there was something in the last image I wanted to point out. I wanted to question. I didn't know if this was processing or the way this really looked, but look at this dark, really dark line on the edge of this rock in the light space. I would love to know if that was there, if that's how the rock looked, because for me, it looks like a processing artifact. But I'm curious if it was caused by the exposure on the sunburst. But that did draw my eye, and I did wonder about that. So where am I? I have to turn my page. Hold on. My notes. Ah, yeah. This was another image that I was like, oh, took my breath away. I think that the exposure on this is just nailed perfectly to capture the lights and the darks and to have all this detail, and then the shutter speed just right to blur out the water itself, and the capture of the light coming in at the top, not really blowing this out all the way down. The composition of, you know, this center of interest being roughly on a third, and then this being roughly on a third. I mean, the composition is just really wonderful with all of these, you know, pieces all pointing us down into the water to look at it. So I felt like it was a great study in texture. You know, it's sharp from front to back where it's supposed to be sharp. The timing of this was great. And the only thing I might say about this is that I might even crop just a tad off of this right side to move the waterfall a little bit to the right, but that is such a minor recommendation. I felt like this was just really well done. I want to go there. I think that the impact of this image is really in the mountains. There's so little detail here that I had a hard time really getting into the story itself. And because these areas are so dark against an area so bright, I think I'm supposed to be really looking at this story about after the rain, and I'm having trouble getting there. I'm not sure that the upper half of the sky really needs to be here to tell the story. We have almost a quarter of the image with no information in it. So I really, although I really would enjoy the scene with a little more light, I was really having trouble getting into the story. The one thing I really appreciated about this image was the color palette. I mean, the green, blue, purple. I mean, oh my gosh. Talk about color harmony. It had wonderful color harmony. I just wished I could have gotten more impact from the image because I know that this could be a really impactful scene. This really texture of these clouds really caught my eye. I mean, they're front and center in the image. It's what most of this image seems to be about is look at that. Even the rain or whatever textures coming out of the clouds were captured, even though they're so far away. Again, given the choice of lens, I wonder if the top part of this image is even necessary. We make this more pano, then we're more intimate with the storm itself, and we get a bigger sense of the landscape. And because the title was about Big Sky Storm, although there's dark clouds here, there's no real storming happening in the top half of this image. So I wonder if the maker would consider taking a look at that and seeing if we become way more intimate with the story once we reduce the top of the image. But really enjoyed the textures of this and the sense of place, and the S-curve bringing us back to the storm itself. I really just enjoyed the perspective that the creativity that the maker had in composing the image itself. I think the impact of this image is really in the painterly nature of the sky itself and the capture of the moon. I couldn't tell if there was a texture placed on this or if the noise from high ISO might have contributed to the texture of the sky, but it just had such a calm painterly feel to it. And if that was not the intent of the maker, then denoising it may have been an opportunity as well. But because of all the noise and texture in the sky, me as a viewer felt like I felt like it was intentional. I loved the placement and sharpness of the moon, and I think in this case, the silhouette of the peaks with no detail just gives us a base to look at the moon and a few of the stars in the sky. So I honestly didn't know if it was a technical flaw or a choice of the maker. I was kind of looking at it from a couple of different perspectives.
Choice.
So the thing I enjoyed most about this image was, again, the depth. The beginning where we have lovely subjects in detail, and then we go to the middle and we've got the interesting trees and the texture, and then we go to the background with the sky and the mountains. And I really enjoyed the progression of this as a vertical, portrait aspect image. So again, this was another image where I really did travel from the bottom to the top. And so the color and the contrast of the colors just really drew me. And then there was more and more and more, and the shape of the flowers. And it just took me all the way through the image. It's a bit flat for the time of day, but for me, that just enhanced the colors in this particular image. And I'm always trying to move the horizon. Some people want to move mountains. I want to move horizons. And I think also we could lose a little bit of the top of this image to really focus on the whiteness of these clouds and not get caught up in the darkness of those clouds. That's a minor point, but that's how I felt about the image. I think this had nice impact when it came up on the screen. And I think that, I mean, it's titled Moonbeam, so we have to assume that the moon is, the intent of the maker is to tell us that these are beams coming from a moon somewhere. They serve to create a great deal of tension in the image for me. So we have this, really cool silhouette here with this really interesting sky. And then we have this really, jagged peak with these harsh kind of geometric beams coming out. And so these feel like two different images to me, technically. And then the amount of the length of the shutter speed, we're starting to get star trails moving this way and this way and this way, and it made me wonder if the exposure was just a little bit too long, making it too bright, and the beams. So I think there were just a couple technical things that I was thinking about as I was looking at the image, so they distracted me. And I know that this is a reflection and this is the reality of this, but this one bright spot in the bottom really does serve to sort of trap me right there. So I also wondered if that could be cropped out of the image so that I don't get sucked back into the bottom and away from the primary and secondary subjects. This is a really nice capture of this mountain. A lot of nice detail. And I think that the upper half of the image is really nice. I think the colors in the sky, the colors in the mountains, the sharpness, it all works together. And I really wish the maker had cropped this image right here, because the bottom of the image, this is the darkest, largest geometric structure. It draws my eye and I get there and it's not even in focus. And for me, in the end, although I come in and I see this, this is where I land and I can't get away from it. So I feel like this really takes away from the beauty of the image. And it takes away from the upper composition, and it doesn't even really fit in the color palette of the top of the image or the sense of place of the top of the image. So I really, really struggled with this image, loving the top half, but the bottom half for me almost ruined the image. So I really would love to see sort of a remake and see what this image looks like with a crop right through the center of the image, eliminating the entire bottom half. That's kind of harsh, and I'm sorry to the maker, but that's what happened. Beautiful leading lines leading me to this, and this becomes the primary subject, not in focus, no detail, and not even a very interesting thing to look at. So I would love to see this on its own. This is nice water. Again, nice use of shutter speed to blur the water. And because this is so bright, it captures my eye, and that's a great starting place. And so I just follow this image all the way from top to bottom. So compositionally, I'm really appreciating this part of the image, with the exception of, I don't think we need the top. I don't think we need the background here at all, because it's the brightest part and we start looking at it and it's really not telling the story of the image. There are some images we take that don't really make good competition style images. When we have these logs coming through here and they break up the flow of the composition, and they become primary subjects, sometimes that they just, no matter what you do, unless you take them out, go move the log, they don't make good competition images. So for me, this image became more editorial in that it was a photojournalistic representation of this place at this moment. And I think that the trees themselves kind of, kind of pull me away from the art of the image itself. And yeah, so I think those things detracted. Beautiful scene, it's well captured, but for what it is, I'm just not sure the scene makes a good competition image. I'm a fan of abstracts, of certainly intentional camera movement and other ways of creating abstracts. The thing I like about this, of course, is the color palette. And I do like that there's one subject that stands out that gives your eye a place to rest in the middle of all of the color. I think that this white or blue, whether it was sky or whether it was a cloud, whatever was the source of this, it becomes another primary subject. So I found that I was competing. Should I look at this? Should I look at this? Should I look at this? Should I look at that? And so I think in some way, not having this in the image would really have strengthened the composition of this image. Another thing when we're doing these kinds of abstracts is that the viewer, me, I expected this to be upright. And I see that the camera movement or whatever caused the abstract nature of the image really went on a slant. So I wasn't really doing an up and down, and I keep wanting to straighten out the image. So make sure that if this slant is in here for a reason, that the viewer can understand it, and that it's not just straightening a crop kind of thing. But the color palette in this is beautiful. I also might recommend a crop a little bit above the bottom, because the movement or the technique that that caused this image seems to have changed, or maybe there were just grasses in the bottom that got caught as part of this, and the nature of the abstractness changes at the bottom, and so it kind of is different. So it draws my eye there, and I think that the image would survive without this change in sort of texture and color. This is very nice composition. You know, we've got a primary subject up here, we've got these secondary subjects here, and they balance each other, and we've got a leading line that lets us see this and then kind of takes us away, you know, it takes us right through the image. I liked that. Again, the timing, I like seeing these trees. I might even like seeing the moon a little lower, a little higher. It works where it is, and I think that the maker had a lot of options in terms of timing for this image. The one technical thing about the image that kind of didn't fly for me was all of these out of focus, probably foreground elements. Pay attention to that. We get this dark splotch in the sky, and it draws my eye. I wonder what that is. Oh yeah, and look at all of this. I don't think the image actually needs that, so be careful, you know, when you're looking, that you don't have that. I was totally guilty of this in some shooting I did in Acadia. Last week, I came home and I had a lot of these. I didn't pay good enough attention to it. The other thing I might want to recommend is adding just a touch of brightness to the tops of the leaves. I like the brightness on this one so that we really see these trees, and maybe even a tiny bit on the trunks, so that this is beautiful. These 4 trees are beautiful against this mountain, and they balance this really well. So I think you could handle just a tad more brightness here to really show off the place where you were when you took this. Again, the colors are great, and we move from warm to cooler. So it's a really nice progression of color in the image. And again, an appropriate shutter speed for what's going on here. And I love this little splash, or maybe it's a rock under there that gave just a little bit of texture here. Maybe that was moving just a little bit slower than the rest of the rushing water. And I really liked that the different speeds were captured there. Again, I might crop on the left a little bit. This is kind of dead center-ish, and I don't think all of this here adds anything to the image. And I think if we crop here, it might force the eye. Now we have this leading line and this leading line forcing the eye into the center, and this becomes the subject of the image. And I may take this down and darken this just a little bit so that it's not the brightest spot in the foreground, so it doesn't compete quite as much with this area of the image. I'm not sure, I'd have to see it, but that was my inclination when I looked at this. I think the impact of this image is really from the contrasting colors of the landscape itself. I felt, excuse me, compositionally, we're just a little tight up here. You know, this mountain is just about bumping its head on the top of the frame. And I'd love to see it have a little bit more space. I also feel like the mountain is in sharper detail than the trees itself. So I think that this had just a few technical challenges. And again, you know, we have this out of focus in the foreground, and I don't know if we could crop it off or not, or do something with it, but I'm not sure what it is. And I don't feel like I need it in the image. So pay attention to these foreground issues, especially in landscapes that you're trying to maneuver between, you know, things that are in the foreground that you don't necessarily want. This image, because of the scale, I don't feel like we're bumping our head as much, just because of the scale of the image itself. I think that the nature of this long bit of the landscape works really well here to support the mountains. I don't know that we need so much in the bottom. I think we could crop this a little bit to bring the center of the image down. There's always a choice when we are photographing reflections, and we have to say to ourselves, is capturing the entire reflection in the water or whatever it's reflecting in, is that a big part of the story? Do I need that whole reflection to tell my story? Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. And that's always maker's choice. As a viewer, I don't see this reflection as the major part of this image. And so when I say crop just below this rock or sand, whatever this is, this island like area here, I think that I wouldn't mind if I lost a little bit of the reflection, because it doesn't change my story at all. It allows me to notice all of the interesting things that are in the image. And it brings my horizon into a place that's not dead center right here. So I would suggest to the maker to try that, and you may try it. You may try any of these crops and say, oh no, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But until I see it, I don't know. But there are things that I might recommend you try. Again, another view of the same. Now, the title of this image was geese. And so immediately I see this, but I see these geese down here. And so because the title drew me there, I go down there. And the first thing I notice is that the geese have this black halo all around them, which is probably a processing artifact. And I get stuck there. So this is beautiful. The mist, a cloud there, and the harsh, you know, the harsh sun on this, probably late day, has left this a little bit overexposed. But I did enjoy the blueness of the bottom. But titling it geese brought me right here, and it just really pulled me away from some of the other beautiful parts of the image itself. This had nice impact when it came up. It's not your typical landscape scene. And part of the impact is that we've been looking at these beautiful landscapes, and this is just different. The same way when the abstract of the trees came up, it's just different. And so the relief, the eye relief from all those beautiful landscapes makes this have more impact than it might in another situation. I really enjoyed the mist and this, just the sense of the place in this. It has such an ethereal feel, and the composition is really wonderful with this curve here. This provides such a great base, and we come to this guy, and then we go out and we look at this guy, and the image is really the bottom half. And I don't know that we need any of this bright, whatever it is, snow on rock or white rock or sky, whatever is showing through here. I don't think we need that in this image. I think we could just crop this in kind of a 16:9 kind of format. And we'd see these trees. So we'd have even more sense of place staying in the image. We're not getting rid of that. But this brightest area that distracts my eye and draws it would be gone. And then I can really focus on the bottom half of this image. But I thought this was really, really nice. Technically, I would like the maker to just address the halo around the two people fishing. Those halos we could get rid of so they don't distract the eye. But otherwise, this is a wonderful story, and on a wonderful day that we understand the sense of place of it. What fabulous color contrast in this image. I mean, really fabulous. The placement, where the photographer stood, getting this off center. There were so many nice things about how the light was handled in a situation like this. The only technical comment, well, I have two. One is that we are getting a little bit of halation on the edges of the mountain, and that's just true in almost every image we capture, where the contrast between light and dark is so, the fall off is so fast. So pay attention to that. The other thing is I would take out or replace this one little stripe, because it does, I mean, these lines do kind of point that way, or you can consider them pointing this way. But this drew my eye, and it isn't necessary. We could either crop here or we could just remove that. But really enjoying the flow through here to take me to the background. Yeah, I thought there were just a lot of really great features about this. I love the title, The Gossips. I thought that was great. The challenge I had with this image was the flatness of the foreground, such a bright sky. And you have such an sort of underexposed, almost flat looking landscape. It looks more like a cloudy day than it does, you know, something with this blue sky here. Another thing is when we're doing landscapes and we get the moon, you know, way up in the sky, and we're not using a lens that you know, exaggerates the moon, I would just take that out, so it's not just this bright dot that grabs the eye. I mean, I assume that's the moon. It might not be the right assumption, but whatever this is, I would remove that from the image, because it isn't really an element of the image itself, and it does distract the eye. So I think the challenge here really is the flatness of it. I mean, it's a really interesting landscape, and I think calling these the three gossips really does make the eye go here, and that may be the title of the rock formation. But it's a, you know, it's really appropriate for this image. But I do think that the flatness,
That was amazing.
the flatness really does take me out of the image itself. I think this image is wonderful. Again, the shutter speed, the length of exposure was just right. I mean, to catch everything in the sky without creating star trails that would distract us. There's enough light, whether it's moonlight or process light in the rocks and the trees, that we still see the scene, but we know it's nighttime. And you know, the addition of the Milky Way in there, the flow of this down and then over to the side makes us look through the whole image. We've got some leading lines here with this color. It's one of the first things we see when we leave the waterfall, and yet it doesn't keep me from going through the rest of the image because it's a leading line back into here. So there are a lot of really great creative choices made here, even the crop. I don't mind losing the trees at the top because they probably go on. And the only thing that I might suggest on this compositionally is to, again, to take just enough off the right side to move this out of the center, but especially because it's facing this way, it feels like it needs more room on this side than it does on this side. And I'm not sure that we would lose the flow of the water, and I don't think we would lose any sense of the landscape if we took some of this away. I apologize for not closing my email before we started this. They keep popping up, but I thought this had so much going for it. Oh, another technical comment is these branches here that are bright, the light on that branch, and here and here and here and here, I would tone those down, because there's a possibility that this would come down here and then these would grab our eye, and you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure that your eye is flowing down here and down here. So I would just darken those to remove any possibility of distraction. You know, I love this. I saw the title, but I saw that and I'm like, oh, that's Harry Potter's sorting hat. I mean, I really did see this as a, you know, one of those almost anthropomorphic things. I'm really happy about looking through this image. It's a dark day. All of the gradations of grays are really nicely processed and captured. I liked the movement in the water, as opposed to the sky feeling fairly sharp given the movement of the water. I'd like to see just a little bit more detail down here in the bottoms where it meets the water, but it's so brooding, you know, it's such a brooding day, and that sense of brooding is really well captured. There was one technical thing in here that I kept going to. I couldn't really make sense of this. It's a very distinct ring with a very distinct inner ring, and this is very evenly round, and I kept going to it. I didn't know if it was intentional, that it was something to do with wizardry, or if this was a processing thing, or what it was, and it did keep drawing my attention. I thought I saw another one on this side, but now I can't find it, so I might have been dreaming. But yeah, this ended up being kind of a major distraction for me, and I can't explain it. If I look in, it really is there. I mean, it doesn't look like a cloud, so I couldn't explain that. So that's a technical thing that I might ask the maker to either explain or fix. This is another really interesting day. I mean, it is so flat. It looks so cold and barren. This for me is trying to be the subject of the image, and yet it's so close to the right-hand edge that I almost jump over it and go and land here. So I had a hard time finding what would be the maker's intent for center of interest. These ghost trees are interesting. You know, the hot springs or whatever this is, I don't know all the right words for things out in your environment. You know, this kind of just gets lost in the clouds. You know, I'm really having a hard time figuring out where to land. And sometimes really interesting places like this on flat days like this make it really hard to create an image for competition. But I'm loving looking at all the parts of it. And then this cutting through the middle, like for me, this is like the most interesting part of the image. And I know the sky is kept in there because the tree is tall, but we move past this tree really quickly. So if the maker really wants this to be the subject of the image, they also might try flipping this horizontally to put this at a place where we see this, and you know, we follow this up to the tree and we land there. So try flipping it if you really want to make this the subject of the image. This has such a nice, happy feel to it. Great sense of place, and the composition of this wrapping around the water, I thought was really nice. You know, I came in, I had a leading line and interesting things to look at, and this just caught my eye. And rather than getting lost and going out the top up that hill, there was just enough of a curve and a leading line reflected in the water to bring me just enough on the edge, just enough detail on the edge to just bring me right back here and enjoying all the different leaf textures and patterns and colors in there. So this was for me just a pleasant image. And I enjoyed that again, it's another image that has like a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know, foreground, middle ground, background. There are some either sensor spots or lens dust here and here that I noticed, so get rid of those, fix those, because they do take away from, you know, the technical side of the image. But even though this is again a hard time day for good landscape photography, I think this scene lent itself very well. And the lighting in it really enhances the colors of it. Well, this one comes on the screen and just hits you in the face. You know, it is there front and center. It's the choice of the crop puts this in a really nice scale. The tree is big enough. It's not overwhelming, so it gives us a sense of vastness. I guess it's a wildebeest maybe at the bottom gives us a sense of how big is this tree. So there's a lot of nice sense of place and scale in this image. There are a few technical things. I would like to see just a touch more detail in the shadow of the tree. I'm not sure I need it in the bottom. I think there's almost enough from the edge to make that fine, but there are also these green dark dots here. I'm assuming it's part of the clouds, another one here, but they do draw the eye. So even if this is actually represented in the scene, some of these are kind of distract my eye. So especially this one, I might want to try to get rid of it, and maybe that one up there. Even though they may be natural to the environment itself. And this is another one that you may want to try flipping it, but maybe not, because the wildebeest is facing this way. So you do get a sense of progression toward this side of the image. But yeah, I thought the impact of this image was really nice, and it just had a few little technical challenges. This was really captivating. I mean, one can guess where this was taken. But the color palette in this is just really beautiful. And it's a case where having a cloudless sky just serves as the right pastel background for this. And it doesn't create, it creates negative space that actually reinforces looking at the landforms and the ice forms. So I think we have a really nice primary subject here, but this is a really interesting secondary subject. And this is another image that I really think would benefit from flipping. And my reasoning is, this is a wonderful leading line, would be from this side leading into the image. And then we would travel across all of this interesting stuff and this beautiful skyline. And then this would be more on this side of the image, and we would naturally just land there and just revel in all the detail and the tones in the ice itself. So I think this is what I'd highly recommend flipping. There is a little bit of a technical breakdown of the sky over here with some sensor dust in the corner. So that could be treated by either cropping just a little bit off of this edge, especially if you flip the image, it could stand to have some cropped off the edge, or cleaning that up right up in here. You see the sky starting to break down here. There's sensor dust here and here. And there's probably more in the corners where it always is. So cleaning a couple of those things up, but this is just really beautiful. Oh, we were just talking about the aurora. There was apparently an amazing aurora this week, somewhere on Earth, a spectacular one. And this is pretty spectacular itself. I'm loving the colors in this. It's a beautiful capture of the sky, and the exposure with the stars as pinpoints is really lovely. I think we've got a few technical things about this image, in that this actually is where our eye finally lands, and there's no detail. It comes across as being extremely soft. It feels like it was painted into the image after the image was taken. And so I feel like that's a real technical challenge for this image, because it is such a prominent landing place in the image itself. But the image has a wonderful sense of place. And yeah, compositionally, I know we want to get as much aurora as possible, but taking some of the negative space off of this image on the side and top might serve to really make our eyes go here and stay here in this part of the image. But yeah, someday everyone needs to see this. Thought this was a really interesting interpretation of the theme of landscape. I really enjoyed the intimacy of this image. I was really enjoying all of the tonal range from dark to light in the image itself. The piece, the diagonal piece, I was kind of ambivalent about it, whether I loved it or I didn't love it. I really wanted to focus on this one, and it interrupted that, yet it still did bring me across the image and break up some of the vertical parts of the image. So I felt kind of conflicted about that piece. The detail is great. Excuse me. One of the bigger technical things that I would recommend would be taking this leaf out, or finding a way to bring back the detail in however it's attached to something. It looks like a leaf that's just floating there. And because it is such a bright object in such a dark space in here, and the leading line that comes down, I land there. And I don't know that that's what the maker intended. I didn't feel like that was intentional. I felt like it was a distraction. I actually liked this coming in from the left, and wished it nature had put it just a little bit higher, but I really did enjoy that detail that broke up the verticals. And I've really enjoyed these sprigs coming off this joint in the bamboo, again, just to break up the verticalness of the image itself. So I thought this had a lot going for it, and it was an interesting, creative interpretation of the subject itself. What a cool tree. What a cool tree, and what a nice way to eliminate what may have been a background that wasn't all that interesting. Coming in really close to this tree, again, an interesting interpretation of landscape. I do like the monochrome conversion and the tint that's applied to this. We have a strong direction of light, and we see that light and shadow. I think it's almost an abstract, but not quite. And there are lots of places to look. I did feel like, gosh, there's no place to land, but I really was enjoying all the textures of the close-up big branches and the roundness that the light brought to them versus the sort of the shrubbery kind of feel in the background of the smaller branches. So I thought this was really interesting. When it first came on the screen, I will tell you, it didn't have a lot of impact for me. I just didn't know where to land. So I think the value in an image like this is spending time in it so that you create your own impact for this image. But if this had just kind of flown by me, the impact wasn't great enough to draw me in. So so we create our own impact when we take the time to look at an image like this. And that's it. That's the last image.
Great job, Chris. So we'll take a moment if anybody has any quick questions before we get into who our winners were. But it's time for a quick question, anyone?
This is a beautiful set of images. There were so many images that I just really loved, and parts of images that were just so amazing to me, like the capture of this right here. Really enjoyed that. There were so many pieces and parts, so kudos. And this, oh, I mean, this is just spectacular and great images. I want to come visit even more.
Well, you're certainly welcome. Great job on the comments. And let's see, if you stop sharing your screen.
Here we go. Ooh.
Wrong thing.
Get my light up.
All righty. Well, we'll get to who our winners were real quick, if everybody can see that.
David, before you do that, I would like to say that this was really, really, really hard to choose the top 5 images. I really could have used about 3 or 4 more honorable mentions. So it was really, really hard to choose.
All right. Well, I agree with you. I thought we had a bunch of great images, and again, love the comments. We have some creative people in the group. So we're going to start out with, I guess, our honorable mentions. So there's these two, and the screen's so small now. Okay, I don't know if Roseanne Zapp is online or here.
David, I'm not sure that we're seeing what you want us to see.
You should be seeing a picture of a canyon.
We're seeing thumbnails.
No, we're seeing thumbnails of
Of images.
folder that is right below movies and music.
That's interesting. Is that what we're seeing here? Give me a second.
These aren't the contest pictures we're looking at.
Tell you what, let's stop sharing because what we're seeing here is what you should be seeing. So is do you see
Now we're
one image?
seeing edge of Hanging Canyon.
Okay. So I don't know. Oh, so Roseanne, you said you're here in the room. If you have any comments or? No. Great. Yeah, great image. And this was Arnie Brocklin's, so the Pape Ranch, so one of our other honorable mentions here. Arnold, you online?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, great shot. All right, we'll go on to. Oops, sorry. So here's our third place. Sue, are you still in the room? Yeah. I really thought this was an interesting, a different eye. Yeah. And yeah,
David, you
Becky,
can use this. You can use the stars right down at the bottom of your screen and not have to go back to the grid.
yeah, I'm having trouble getting to some of them. So. Yeah. But yeah, it's Becky. You still online with us? Congratulations, beautiful shot.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Becky, were those colors actually in the sky or is that an artifact of processing?
Those are pretty much in the sky. Truth be told, I took this with my iPhone on a road trip, and I had to lighten the bottom a little bit, and because it was pretty dark, and I don't know that. I mean, there were a lot of colors in there, and it was a pretty weird sun that was off to my right that was actually lighting up that field. So I don't honestly, I'd have to go back and look at the original image, but seems like you can't do a
Go
lot.
back and check because
Yeah,
in a lot of competitions that really counts against you for technical, but this was such a strange looking sky and the light was so odd, you know, I couldn't tell.
yeah. I'll go back and look at that. Thank you.
All right. And here's our first place, Arnold Brockling with the parched,
All right.
and it's getting more parched.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's here for Arnold.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Arnie, is that Palisades?
I don't think. All right, so now we'll get to our level 2. Oops. So here's our 2 honorable mentions. Ben with his that great color off Lake Jackson in the winter. So I don't know if Ben's online, but congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then Lewis, yeah. Lewis obviously went to some cold places the past year, so yeah,
Only way to go. Thank you very much.
yeah.
Flip that image, Lewis, and let me know.
I will do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so Lewis, somebody wanted to know where this was taken.
That was our trip up to Baffin Island in the spring for polar bear watching, and that's a huge iceberg.
How are the bear sightings?
Fantastic. Unbelievable.
All right. So our third place here was Bobby. I don't know if he's online. But yeah. I gotta say it's technically really difficult to do. And I was okay. Well, evidently a brand new member, so great job.
These top three images are all just really excellent.
And this is David Morgan's. I don't think he's online, but I believe he shot that back in the springtime. So yeah, the color in the canyon is wonderful.
Just the separation of foreground and background was amazing in this image.
And Bobby got first place with this one.
Wow.
Yeah.
This was also technically so well done. All three of them.
Any other comments from anyone? Questions? Wow. Well, I appreciate everybody attending and all the great photos. I thought everybody did a wonderful job. And Chris, what a wonderful job of judging. I think a lot of our people really love a good critique, and I hope we got everything, or we got some stuff out of it. So last
was
comments, anybody?
Oh, thank you. It was great.
Yeah. All
It was
right.
great for me. I love seeing all your images. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you'll have to get out here sometime and we'll show you
I
around.
do.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much. I'll get back with you and what a good job. So, all right.
Right.
See you, everybody. Look,
Nice to
Thank-
see everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.